Recognize. Umbra Walker. D01. Recognize. The Caleb G. D02.
Hello, team. Welcome to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files, Episode 8. I am everyone's favorite sidekick, Caleb. What am I doing in Bialia? And I am here to introduce Rich, who is here to hack our minds to grok what happened, Howard.
That's my job.
Thank you so much for listening to Whelmed today. We absolutely appreciate it. If you would like to get in touch with us, reach us on Twitter at the YJ Files, email whelmedpodcast@gmail.com, and of course hit up our website, crashingthemode.com.
Dude, where were you? Breaking radio silence.
And with that housekeeping out of the way, let's turn it over to Rich.
Hello, Megan.
Today's episode is Bereft, and Caleb and I are both super excited about this one.
Oh, this episode.
The release date was March 11th. We're still on a weekly schedule. It's pretty much going to fall apart here pretty soon. The in-episode date is September 4th. It rolls over into September 5th a little later on because a lot of this happens at night. The director was Michael Chang, and the writer was Nicole... Oh, man, I'm going to do this again. Dubuque? It's got to be Dubuque.
Probably.
Nicole, we once again invite you to come on the show to talk to us about being a writer for Young Justice and correct us in person.
And of course, I would also like to point out that this episode features some outstanding voice work, specifically bringing in Mr. Alan Tudyk. And one of my favorite voices, I think, Mariana Sirtis.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Even though we don't know exactly who she is, she's in there.
We can hear it. She's in there, absolutely. Yeah, and we've already heard Alan Tudyk a little bit because he also does the voice of Green Arrow in the show. But if you look at the credits, we were just talking about how that man is all over it.
Oh, well, before we go too much further into just spewing gushy, geeky love on this episode, let's get to our mission briefing.
Just in time for your next mission.
So our pre-credit scene is McGann, this Martian, waking up in the desert. She's speaking Martian to herself. She's confused as to where she is. She eventually realizes that she's on Earth, and she's really excited about it, but she comments about how it doesn't quite look like it does on TV because she's in the middle of a desert. Can't remember how she got there. Then Superboy super leaps into the frame, landing next to her. She asks if he's Superman because he's got his shirt on. He roars bestially and tears his shirt off and attacks her and then takes off. And she is completely shaken by what's happening. And so are we.
And from there, we cut over to Robin stumbling through the desert. He's confused. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know how he got there. And then he realizes he has lost 6 months of memories. He soon realizes he's in the Bialian desert when he sees soldiers searching the dunes. He starts to radio Batman, but has a brief flash of memory of Batman telling him to maintain radio silence.
We cut to KF and Artemis. KF is in stealth mode in his suit. Artemis, they're both in an abandoned shack. The first thing we notice is that Kid Flash is being very nice to Artemis, which is weird. So you immediately know they've lost their memories. Artemis she isn't even sure how she got into the costume that she's wearing, so we now know that she hasn't been doing this very long. And she makes some offhand comment about, Dad must have made me do this, and KF says, why? And she says, oh, he probably wants me to kill you. And then they hear incoming fire and run out of the shack just as it blows up when a tank fires at it.
The next few scenes are Kid Flash and Artemis avoiding Bialian patrols. McGann is flying around the desert. She stops for a moment and meditates, and she starts to regain her memories about the team. We also see Robin tracking a GPS marker, and he finds an equipment cache, but doesn't really know why it's there. And we also see Superboy being captured by the Bialians, and he is mentally shut down by our villain of the episode, Simon.
Oh, yes. Simon. McGann, Robin, Artemis, and KF manage to regroup. and McGann gets him to agree to piece together their various memories. Each of them remember to get a whole. They finally remember the now probably extremely dehydrated Aqualad also is part of the team, and he's unconscious somewhere. They're able to track him now that Robin knows to look for him. McGann senses Superboy in pain because he's being tortured by the Bialyans and flies off to help him. Unfortunately, even though she goes in camouflage form, she runs into Simon again because, we find out that it's again. So that's when we discover what really happened, which was McGann had already infiltrated the base in camouflage mode. Simon had detected her psychically and then attacked her, wiping her memories. But because the team was linked to her psychically, they also lost the past 6 months of their memories. And since Superboy wasn't alive 6 months ago, his entire life had been erased and he had gone feral.
We also see that something else has been captured and tortured and studied by the Bialyans. It is a large metal sphere that is not only sentient, but is also concerned about Superboy. McGann fights Simon psychically. Superboy wakes up and breaks free. The sphere breaks free. And here we see Superboy accidentally touching McGann, entering her psychic landscape, and she puts all his memories back together, and he becomes himself again.
Then McGann continues to fight Simon while Superboy and the Sphere protect her against Bialyan soldiers. But she only ends up winning when Superboy pops back in, joins her again, and they work together. During the psychic battle on the psychic plane and the physical plane, we start to see a glimpse of McGann's massive power, which is that telekinetically she is causing a massive dust storm to spin around them as she fights. We get a glimpse after that the mind link between McGann and Superboy has made them both aware of how they feel about each other, which was a really nice moment.
And from that point, the rest of the team is in the bioship with Aqualad, getting him rehydrated. McGann flies back with Superboy, and Sphere is rolling through the desert behind them. From that point, we cut to Simon reporting to the Light how McGann escaped with Sphere and Superboy. The Light says that is acceptable, as this was simply a test of their new allies' delivery system, and that more and better technology, some technology that would put Sphere and Superboy to shame, would be on its way.
I'm feeling the Aster. Can we go to the Aster?
Yeah, let's jump to this Aster, because we got a lot to talk about.
Superboy, are you alright?
I'm fine. Feeling the Aster.
First of all, right off the bat, this is the first episode where I realized this was not an episodic series. It maybe should have been apparent a little earlier, but it wasn't. And this was it, because the very end fade-out scene, we talked about this in the last episode, was Batman saying there has been a massive power surge in the desert of Bialya. That's like a normal TV show, you would have like, they're going to go on a Bialyan thing, and then the next week, we're going to watch the show, and they're going to be doing something else, whatever. We won't hear about the Bialyan thing. No, it's exactly what was happening, but we didn't quite get it. And I'm not even convinced I realized it the first time I watched the show, because it wasn't until the second time I watched the show, I'm sure, that I realized the connection. Because you don't open up knowing that you're in Bialya. You open up in this weird place, and you're concerned more for the team than you are about where they are, or what's happening, or what their mission was. You don't even find out until later on.
And that makes the payoff that much better. When you're watching this series through and you hear Batman kind of fading into the background talking about the next mission, and then we jump right into the middle of events. We don't know what's happening. The team is apparently scattered. You forget for a second what happened last episode. But then as those memories are rebuilt, we see that scene again in more detail. And we now see the continuity reestablished. And it gives us a great immediate payoff from watching the series in order and sticking with it. But it also reinforces the fact that Young Justice is building a much larger continuity, and it's showing us how it is building that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we get back to this in media res conversation we kind of touched on last episode as well. And we're going to talk about that in the debrief. A couple of other just little things before we get to the big things. And a lot of the big things are going to be crashing the mode. Sorry, people. Batman mentioning Bialya is outside the League's UN charter. Okay, so that's a throwaway line. But not. It gives this idea of like, whoa. In Justice League Unlimited, they didn't necessarily have a UN charter when they first started. They just did what they were doing because they were superheroes. And it wasn't until later in the series that they started to talk about the UN charter situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Justice League Unlimited.
Mm-hmm.
So in this one, you're like, no, ooh, interesting. Like, there are places they can and can't go, shouldn't go, right? The UN has agreed that they can act within the borders of certain countries. Like, yeah, I mean, from a comic book standpoint, sure, you want Superman to go wherever you want, but from like the verisimilitude they're creating in this show, that's kind of nuts and interesting. Like, we're agreeing that Batman can sneak into our country and do crazy crap. It's basically what somebody signed on the charter. It's basically Iron Man's argument in Civil War, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is, right? It's the Sokovia Accords, but, years and years and years before they had that in the movies, right?
It's also a way to bring reality into the series without breaking it. It makes sense that these superheroes who have pledged to protect humanity have some sort of rules that they have to follow. It's not just them running around doing whatever they want.
Right.
It adds in that level of, okay, these are like the next level of law enforcement.
Right. And they didn't have to put that in. Again, the writers didn't have to write that in. There are certain conceits when you're watching a superhero show, right? Which is superheroes are going to go do good things and they're going to do them wherever good things need to be done, right? You don't have to put that in there. But they put it in there specifically. And it also gives this, it's very subtle, but it gives this little bit of a punch to Bialya, right? So Bialya in the comics, like the Queen Bees has lots of different interpretations, from the most extreme, silliness of comic books, looking like a giant bee, with all of her little bee workers and whatnot, and having like Hive, being like her thing. They've created an actual country in which she resides and gave it a grounded, real feel, right? Her minions, right? Her worker bees are really scary soldiers, actually, right? There is a dynamic between countries we'll see in the future between the country of Karak, which is an established DC Middle Eastern country, and Bialya as well, which comes into play later on. So again, that layering that you're talking about, it's this little bit of thing on top of thing, right? And all coming from basically what looks like a throwaway line. It gives that depth and breadth of feel to an entire DC universe instead of just about the team and what is just the team doing in a vacuum.
It also reinforces the fact that the team exists to do covert missions.
Yeah, great point, actually. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yes, absolutely.
Obviously, the League can't be seen crossing the border into Bialya.
Right.
This also points out the fact that Batman, while he respects the Charter,
that's fair,
also is willing to throw it out the window.
That didn't even occur to me, and you're 100% right. I don't know why. It's one of those, whoops. Yeah, exactly. Like, this is outside the UN Charter, so the League isn't technically going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The capital T team is going. I'm doing air quotes,
Well, there's also a quote from a future episode where Batman says, "The League must be seen doing X."
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So he's created this purpose of the team to not only be covert, not only be kind of a training and a proving grounds, but to support the League when the League has to be doing something visible to the world. Right. The League is not only a collaboration of do-gooders, but they also represent something very important and very visible.
Yeah. Both, I think, to support that I hate to say PR because that makes it sound like it's contrived, but like the hope that the Justice League inspires in the world, but also in that particular case of that episode, if I remember correctly, which one you're referencing, it's also, we have to be seen by the villains doing X so that they feel like, oh, we have gained the attention we wanted. That's all we need to worry about. who needs to worry about sidekicks, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We don't ever think like, oh, when you see Batman, you're like, oh, where's Robin? No, that Joker might. But like, I don't know, Toyman, he wouldn't think twice about it. Who cares, right?
Right, absolutely. And again, all of this feeds into just building the structure and the foundation that makes Young Justice so capable of standing on its own and being such a great story.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Psychic combat, baby. Man, so Hero System was my game. The Hero role-playing system was my game. Champions back in 1983. I had the receipt from 1983 of my boxed set of Champions I bought with my allowance. I played that game to death, and this is exactly the way I ran Psychic Combat. I love every minute of it. It's like the Psychic Combat being its own pocket dimension. And the scene where they cut to, where Simon is just standing there, staring into space, and the scientist is like, Mr. Simon, hello, and he's looking, and Simon's looking right at McGann, but McGann's in camouflage mode, and she's floating, and she's not saying anything either, so it just looks like Simon's staring into space. But then Superboy wakes up, and he sees that Simon's standing there, and he kind of sees like a book or something float past behind McGann, and he sees the distortion, and so he flips to infrared mode and sees that she's sitting there. And even though he's lost all of this memory, you can tell there's like something in him that realizes something's not right. Like somebody he cares about is in trouble, right? Even though he attacked her at the beginning, you can see that now he's exhausted, he's been tortured, he's calmer, actually, from all that exhaustion, and he can maybe think a little bit, right? And then, oh my God, I freaking loved it. And then how they cut, it's like a holodeck thing, man. It's the Inception, it's the Matrix, I loved it. Love it.
And this is not the last time we will see this method of handling psychic warfare, psychic exploration.
Psychic mental repair.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's also very interesting that not only does this practice, this method of handling this visually keep coming up, but also the themes of mind control and memory loss. These happen again and again and again. And the show does not shy away from them, even though it is a repeated theme. It gives them their moments in the spotlight when they're necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And just like I said in last episode, when we were talking about all the cool Atlantean sorcery, how much I just loved that visually.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel the exact same way here. Just, this is what I want when I play a role-playing game. This is what I visualize. This just cool explosion of powers and the different ways McGann and Simon were dealing with things. So very cool.
Oh, and the last thing I want to talk about is, shocking, Rich is going to talk about using language again in an animated series. No way. So we get more Atlantean language, and here's the thing. I'm starting to piece together what Aqualad was saying in Atlantean based on the very little I've been able to piece together from the language we've seen so far. He talks about Tula, which is not a surprise, but he also says something about being back in Atlantis, and he uses the word symbiosis, which is, we've seen in future episodes, kind of means together, or like symbiotic, basically was the inspiration of that word. The fact that he's basically saying that he wants to be back in Atlantis and be with Tula. Now, it's not a shocking thing because we just saw that in the previous episode, but the fact that they didn't just make some babbling and put Tula's name in there, right? Symbiosis is something we haven't been introduced to yet and gets introduced as a word later on in a few episodes, right? But this is the first time we hear it, and we have no context as to what it means. But now in flashback, once again, we're seeing that, he's actually saying something specific in this language. In addition to that, we get some Martian language as well. Like, we don't get much of that in the rest of the series, but the fact that McGann wakes up and she's babbling or not babbling, she's just thinking and talking in Martian language. It's just like, God, guys, you're freaking killing me. Give us dictionaries, man. I'm in. I am fully in. Some linguistics nerd needs to just help me see what this is. I want an Atlantean language because I love what they're doing with it so far.
And I think, again, what is great about this is that the writers did not just use random babbling, gibberish.
Yeah.
They took the time to actually structure out the language, at least within the context of these phrases. And then they brought those phrases back in later episodes, so they established some continuity and context that these languages are real within the Young Justice episodes.
Like, you could take Atlantean as a language in high school. Oh, I took AP Atlantean. You know, like, it's just, you know what I mean? And actually, in the comics, they nod to the fact that, because in the comics, at one point, Superboy and McGann go to Atlantis with Calder and deal with an issue. It's great. But they say, like, oh, I'm surprised that you can speak Atlantean, right? Well, McGann's like, oh, I'm not speaking Atlantean. I'm connecting with you telepathically and translating. And you're like, oh, she's doing that for the whole team. And then Superboy's like, oh, no, I can speak Atlantean. You're right. He's like, no, the genome's programmed me with 6 million forms of communication. We don't even know at this point in time, but he's just like, oh, no, I'm actually just speaking Atlantean, which is so awesome. I love Superboy.
Yep.
I love this Superboy, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, we all know that I love this version of Superboy so much. So
Yeah.
A couple points that I wanted to bring up. Of course, I'm echoing and mirroring everything you've said here, Rich. A couple details jumped out at me. One of them is Robin, once again, coming up with the phrase whelmed.
Oh, yeah, the little callback.
Yeah, totally naturally. Why isn't anyone just whelmed? It's just a thing.
That's right.
It's just a thing.
It's the way his brain works.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, it's silly, it's fun, it's a nice meta nod to us watching. But it also does point out the fact that Robin, Dick, thinks like this. This is his character. It wasn't just a silly word that the writer said, hey, wouldn't this be funny?
They're not imposing the joke on the character. The character really does this. Yeah, absolutely.
It lets us see that Dick is a normal young teenager, and he thinks of just funny things like this.
Also, it's a pretty stressful bunch of scenes we're seeing, actually, relatively stressful, and there needed to be a little bit of a joke nod, relief valve, and that was a great callback to choose for that, I think.
And that's something that comes up when we are talking about role-playing games as well. Having a break moment is very important for players because it lets us take a breath. When we're in a really tense, stressful, high drama, high tension, high horror scene, those jokes, those breaks are very important because it lets us refocus and get back into the character.
Yeah, and it gives perspective because if you continually hammer someone with a horror theme or an intense emotional theme, whether it's drama or whatever it happens to be, if you don't get much of a rest, you can kind of get sensory deprivation from it, right? So you can your reaction to it gets a little bit dulled because you're just getting hammered with it so much. When you get a little joke or a little break, that's why when you're watching a show and you're like, oh, things are going really, really well. Uh-oh. Like, things are going to go badly, right? So you have this success-failure cycle that's common in any show, right? You succeed at something and then you fail, and you succeed and fail. It's the 2 steps forward, 1 step back situation until the final conflict, right? But in this case, you also want to have that relief so you can have perspective on how horrifying the situation is that you're in.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. A couple other details. I really loved how dedicated McGann was to finding and helping Superboy.
Yeah.
We know that this is building their relationship. But just as a character, we're now seeing more of McGann. And we're seeing that even though she's with the team and she's struggled to recreate their memories and Calder's in trouble, she's making Superboy a priority.
Right. She also knows that Aqualad's with the team now.
Right.
Like they're all together and they're safe, relatively safe, but Superboy is alone with no memories and being tortured. She prioritized things which some people may question, but I get it.
And that also speaks a little bit to more of her character, her need, her desire, her drive to be part of a family.
Yep. To be accepted.
Yeah, to be accepted, absolutely. As we learn more about McGann, we see why that is so important. And that makes these early scenes so much more impactful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, really minor detail, but in the final fight with Simon, after Superboy's helping her, one of the psychic constructs she creates is a shield, and it's the classic Superman shield.
Yeah, I noticed that too, and I didn't write that down, but it jumped out at me as well. And it was after she had repaired his memories, like she was drawing on his strength to try and protect herself, which I thought was a really cool, quick little nod. It's a quick scene, and she ends up kind of getting hammered anyway, but it's just the idea that she tried.
That's after Superboy rejoined the battle and is saying, hey, let's do this together, right?
No, it's actually after the first time she puts it together.
Oh, is it?
Because he comes back. Yeah, it is. And then he comes back after that, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, you're right.
Because when he comes back after that, he, together, he said, you're strong and I'm stubborn. Let's do this.
Okay,
right?
Yep, you're absolutely right. The other small point I wanted to bring up was when McGann was trying to recreate everyone's memories, both her and Artemis are very hesitant to join into this. Artemis specifically says, no more than 6 months, only what you need, right?
Right.
And even McGann is saying, this is really risky, but we have to try to rebuild our memories. You guys are in my mind right now. And we'll talk later on about why all of this is so risky, but I thought it was good to reinforce to viewers the fact that the necessary actions had consequences.
Yes, absolutely.
And using psychic powers is not just a Deus Ex Machina, fix everything button. It was risky, it might not work, and it could open the door to other problems.
Yeah. We're going to crash that mode, I think.
Yeah, we're going to have to.
We're going to have to.
But before we get to that, I think we need to jump over to our Canary Debrief and hit some storytelling moments here.
Stick around. Class is in session.
Thank you, Canary. In media res. So we talked a little bit about this in the last episode. In media res means you start in the middle of the action, a la Star Wars A New Hope, etc., and you don't maybe not know what's going on. In media res is used in some good ways and some not so good ways. So it's pretty common for shows, it's not uncommon anyway, particularly crime shows, to start with an episode of something and showing something shocking, like, oh, it looks like our protagonist is dead, or whatever. Or they're in a situation, we don't know how they got there, it's a ridiculous or horrifying situation, how did they get there? And then there'll be like a cut and it says 36 hours earlier, or 24 hours earlier, or a week earlier, whatever it happens to be. And then we get to see what led them up to that. And I think that's perfectly fine once in a while. But when it's getting overused a lot over the last, I've noticed, maybe 5-6 years in shows, probably even longer than that. It just being a bit overused. So in this particular case, we don't get that. We get an in media res, and we get flashbacks. But the in media res and the flashbacks are so tightly woven into the story itself, it doesn't feel like it's shocking because the writers wanted to shock us. It makes sense because it puts us in the minds and the positions of the characters on the screen, right? We don't know what happened to McGann either. We don't know when Robin's like, September, or whatever he said. He was like, what happened to March? We get his disorientation and understand kind of what's happening and get to discover it with them. And when they have the flashbacks, they aren't just flashbacks just for the watcher. These are flashbacks we're watching and taking that, and I've said this before, this emotional ride with the characters. We're being shown, not told. We're experiencing what's happening. The flashbacks were handled in just a much smoother way than in most shows. And I think this is a great example of, if you're going to do an in media res or you're going to do flashbacks, have it be integral to the story and not just a mechanic that feels like the author or writer is imposing it to instill or demand an emotional reaction from who is reading or watching what you're watching. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about was for role-playing games. And the psychic combat is a perfect example of how to instill player agency in the story or combat that you're showing. So in a role-playing game, you have a lot of number crunching, right? Typically, games have some kind of number crunching. In a game like Champions, for example, there's a lot of number crunching. But describing what a power does as opposed to what it does mechanically is a different thing. There's a scene where McGann separates herself into a whole bunch of more of herself and fires at Simon with a bunch of laser blasts, right? In a psychic combat, you can give this extra agency to your players to describe the things. Okay, so McGann maybe has some kind of psychic blast or some kind of thing that she uses, and in the real world she can't split herself up, but it doesn't matter what the mechanics are. Describe something interesting. Ask the player, how does this look? How do you react to, all right, Simon is going to grow to massive heights. How are you going to respond to that? I mean, the player might just say, oh, I grow to his height and we're now wrestling or whatever. Or they might come up with something more interesting. And the back and forth becomes as much about describing the cool scenes between each other in a dramatic manner as it is, okay, now it's your turn. I'm going to roll some dice, right? Let your players have some agency in things that, I don't want to say don't matter, but aren't going to have a direct effect on the story you're telling necessarily or change massive plot points. Keep a hold of those and learn how to give some of that choice to your players so that they can become part of that story and create it with you.
Absolutely. And this is also where the concept of failing forward, I think, plays in.
Absolutely, yeah. Can you explain what that is for people who don't know?
Failing forward is what happens when the results of the dice are not advantageous, but instead of simply saying what you were trying to do did not happen next turn, you take that as a moment to build the story. And instead of just saying, nope, that didn't happen, sorry, you say, okay, so you failed your roll. Let's say that this happened instead, thus accomplishing your same goal, but now there's a bigger problem or a larger consequence. Mm-hmm. Failing forward is a way to not simply shut down the momentum of the story because the die roll said to. It's a way to rewrite a failed die roll and incorporate it into the events. So as a great example, in the psychic battle, McGann was just getting her butt kicked over and over and over. Every time she fired off a bolt and Simon just brushed it off. We could say in game terms, that's a failed roll. Or when she makes a shield but Simon breaks it, that could be a failed roll, depending on the uniqueness of the mechanics you're using. So as a GM, let's say my player is McGann, and McGann says, all right, I'm going to use a psychic blast, and the roll fails. So I could just say, okay, it failed, you didn't hit Simon, next player, and we move on. But if we're using failing forward, what I can say is, okay, so you did not damage Simon. Why? He grew to immense heights. Okay, now we have a giant Simon. So we failed, but we're moving the story forward.
Right. And in some systems, they have it built in, like Fantasy Flight Games story dice, right? So you can literally fail and triumph. Mm-hmm. You can fail with advantages or fail and have a triumph. So in these cases, you might, a great example from the first game that I played in, I sniped at a guy on a platform. I missed him, but I had like 5 advantages. So I sniped at the guy. I didn't hit him, but he saw it coming and dodged out of the way in a way that caused him to fall off the platform. Right? So in a binary situation like old school first edition Dungeons and Dragons, you either re-rolled your d20, either you hit or you missed. And that was pretty much it. Maybe you got some description into what that's going to be. The failing forward, as Caleb is describing, is a great way of continuing to grow the story. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Non-binary, I think, is the best way to understand that. It's not just succeed or fail. There are degrees of success and failure.
Right, absolutely. Cool. We got some modes to crash.
Yeah, we definitely have some modes to crash here.
Tell us something we don't know yet.
Sorry, BB. We can't risk altering the time stream. We do that, we're all feeling the mode.
Guys, we are going to be talking about spoilers. This episode is full of spoilers and details about the larger Young Justice universe and DC itself. If you do not want to be spoiled, skip ahead and do not listen. If you do listen, you have been warned.
All right. Do you want to talk about Sphere?
Oh, man.
Why don't you talk about Sphere?
Sphere is really cool. And Sphere is also very intimately related with something we see in the final scene here. Another type of teleport device opening up. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a boom tube.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what a boom tube is a method of teleportation that comes from Apocalypse and New Genesis.
Yeah. Right. So this is parallel to the Zeta teleportation tubes. We talked about Zeta technology in the very, very first episode. This is a boom tube. So when you know what a boom tube is and you hear someone say, my new ally is delivering me technology, and the technology, then the delivery device is a boom tube, there is only one person who is sending you things, and you do not want that person involved. And that is Darkseid. Darkseid is the ruler of Apocalypse, and we're massively spoiling, but the very last scene of the second season, we finally see that Darkseid has been involved with, if not behind, everything that we're going to see in the next, from now on, basically, with the light.
But we also don't know. We still don't
know. But we don't know for
the
sure.
Details. We just know he's
Right.
involved. I think it's also really cool, while Darkseid and Apocalypse are some of my favorite parts of the DC universe, the fact that they exist means that New Genesis exists as well.
Right, which is the polar opposite of Apocalypse.
Yeah. And that's actually where Sphere comes from in this context. New Genesis is the heaven, the nirvana, compared to the hellish landscape that is Apocalypse.
Mm-hmm. We're actually going to have Jeff Stormer from the Party of One Pod on to talk in detail about Jack Kirby and the Fourth World and the Forever People and et cetera, et cetera. So look forward to that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Well, not a little bit. I suspect Jeff will talk a lot about it. He's a fan, but they're also intimately tied to the Superman mythos as well. He's often going toe-to-toe with Darkseid.
There's a couple other moments here to bring up. Some of them are very brief.
Oh, I want the McGann stuff.
I'm giving you the setup here. Rich.
I was worried.
You know, we might have seen McGann in a different outfit very briefly.
Oh, my God.
What was that, Rich? You want to tell us about it?
Darcy and I, during our Darcy Ross interview, we talked about this. So if you've heard that already, then you see this coming. So we've talked about McGann's story arc and how up to this point in time, McGann has been kind of this ditzy, almost cliche stereotype TV ditzy teenage girl. We find out later on, of course, that she's like that because she's basing this persona that she's assumed on Earth on a ditzy teenage stereotype TV show that called Hello, Megan. In this episode where she's rebuilding Superboy's memory, we get a couple of images, not just of his past and her life together, but we get these quick flashes of two scenes. One is McGann, apparently, in a cheerleader outfit saying, "Hello, Megan," which is weird because we've never seen her in a cheerleader outfit. We have no reason to believe she should have ever been in one. So I noted that the first time. The thing I didn't note was a very quick flash of some very huge, horrifying white monster with its brain exposed and some craziness. But it's amongst so many other things you don't note it. So here's the thing. That's Megan in her normal form. She is a white Martian, not a green Martian like Martian Manhunter. She's been putting on this not just the air of a Megan Morse from the show, but of being even vaguely human in any way. When she makes that reveal to the team toward the end of season 1, she doesn't want to reveal it because she thinks that she's going to be turned away and denied and not accepted by her friends, horrified by her friends, which is understandable, except Superboy never flinches in that scene. And he tells her 20 episodes later, "I knew the whole time. That time we mind-linked in Bialya, I knew from there. And I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." Now, the first time I saw that, I was like, oh, that's kind of nice. Yeah, that's a nice little callback or whatever. And then I rewatched it and I went, oh, no, holy crap. No, it's really in those memories. Like it's in there. Like, we saw it. Like, he's not just making reference. Like, they're not just making a convenient callback. They planted that freaking seed for us, and we just didn't know what we were watching. And then, of course, the McGann in the cheerleader outfit is actually the character of Megan Morse from the Hello, Megan TV series that is replaying in McGann's head because it's so much of a part of who she is. Oh my God. I mean, when I realized that they had put her actual form in there and that this was a callback and they were setting this whole reveal up for 20 more episodes, I just, oh my God, it's so good. Oh.
It just goes to show, and we've said this many, many times, we're going to keep saying it, nothing is done by accident in Young Justice.
No.
The writers and the creators, they are not just making choices and then later on finding these threads and pulling them together. Yeah. They are making specific, conscious decisions to say, let's include this detail now that will pay off in 2 episodes, 10 episodes, 20 episodes.
Well, not just that payoff, but also not just 20 episodes, but 20 episodes and if somebody watches the whole series a second time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because you can plant that, what we talked about in the last episode of Downtime, where there's a, comedy network thing in the background on a TV show that says, hey, we're going to, next up, another episode of Hello, and then they cut the TV off, right? We have no idea what that is. That's a seed planted for sure. But if you don't watch it the show a second time, you have no clue that even happened. It's just background noise, right? And, I mentioned this, tons, of course, on social media. And Brandon Vietti said, we did this a few times for things. I'm like, dude, you did it. You didn't do it just like, oh, here's one. That's cute. That's not at all what you guys did. I don't know what you think you did or what you thought maybe you did, but what you actually did is blowing my mind to the point where I started a podcast about what you did in your writer's room. So, oh my gosh. Okay, I need to take a breather.
All right, so we can talk a little bit about the memory control and loss that is part of what we're seeing here in this episode. Obviously, we have a start and endpoint resolution of people losing their memories and getting them back within the context of this one particular episode. However, and we even said this a little bit earlier in this podcast, this theme happens over and over and over in Young Justice. From the very beginning, from the pilot episodes, we saw mind control. We saw the genomes controlling Superboy, controlling Guardian, both erasing memories, implanting impulses and urges. There is more of that to come, especially as we are getting into what the Light is doing and what their grand plans are.
Right.
In the previous episode, we talked about Starro and how Starro is a huge throwback villain that basically mind-controlled all the Justice League into doing things. And now we know that the Light has some of the Starro genetic material to use in part of their plans. So,
and access to genetic scientists.
Absolutely, right. This is a great example of how the show is building forward. They're taking these details that we see and layering them one on top of the other to build the larger story. But the show is also capable of going backwards. Because as we just talked about, laying these seeds that are revealed later on, that makes the story better when you reflect or rewatch it. Then we see how everything builds. The show goes both ways. The show says, hey, here's a thing, here's another thing, here's another thing, bam, here's the big story. But the show is also willing to drop these little details and say, you're going to realize this payoff in 20 episodes. Or you're going to realize how awesome this is after you've watched the series 5 times and finally put it together.
Exactly. And some of and it's not just seeds planted for McGann and Superboy. Artemis gets a nod. These writers know how to make the watchers ask the right questions. I want you to make me ask questions. The question should never be, why am I watching this show? This show sucks. The question should be, wait, what Artemis's dad probably wanted her to kill Kid Flash? Like, wait, what? And they make it kind of a throwaway joke, and Kid Flash makes it a bit of a Kid Flashy joke. But we get this drop of more information about what Artemis's history is for those of us who don't know, right? I feel pretty well versed in the DC universe. Artemis is definitely not a character I was familiar with. I've done research on her, of course, since the show started, and finding out, what dark corner of a back closet they pulled this character from. So there's no way that I could really know or understand her history right off the bat, or even how they were interpreting it. And that goes back to McGann as well. Even if I knew that McGann was a white Martian masquerading as a green, that monster that they put on the screen is not the way that the white Martians are typically depicted in the comics. That thing is horrifying. And so even as a skilled watcher or skilled person who knows the DC universe, I have no reason to think that that's a white Martian. It's just a monster. But in callback, it's not only awesome that it is a white Martian, it's awesome in that it's not just like, oh, I'm a white Martian, but I just look like a green one and have white skin. No, you look like a horrifying monster, and I can understand why you feel the way that you do. Or that you'd be concerned about a race that doesn't look anything like that, and you see them being horrified by things that are much less horrifying than you are.
Absolutely.
Caleb's just nodding his head.
It's one of those things where, again, it just points to the depth that the show is willing to go to build a universe. We talked about how Young Justice inhabits its own universe in the DC multiverse. Yep. And everything we're pointing out here is just building the reality of this version of DC.
Right. And we're also planting more seeds of various relationships, not just McGann and Superboys, but also Kid Flash and Artemis, to the point where Robin literally tells them to get a room. Right. So now we're like, oh, this isn't just a banter back and forth between characters who don't like each other. Okay, maybe not only is there maybe something going on, or maybe something will go on, but Robin is already, again, many steps ahead of everyone in the story.
And we know how great Robin is at pointing out those little details.
Exactly. Great stuff. And layering it slowly. It's just fantastic. All right.
Anything else here we need to crash, Rich?
I think this mode has been successfully crashed.
All righty. So let's wrap up here. Let's move on to some fan service. What do you have for us today?
Oh, my gosh. A friend of mine came over to my house a few years ago and he said, Rich, listen to this song. I'm like, oh, okay. So I enjoy music, but I'm not like a music aficionado. But what I do love to do is listen to lyrics and figure out what story is being told, which is why I love these AMVs we often recommend, because it's not just the words, but how someone has tied the words to Young Justice, which is something that has a lot of emotional punch. I'm listening to this song, and partway through, after the first couple of, I don't know what you call them, stanzas, I don't know, I start to realize that the song is about Barry Allen, the Flash. It is a song called The Ballad of Barry Allen by a band named Jim's Big Ego. And we'll put a link to the YouTube video of the song itself. But I highly recommend you guys just to go to iTunes and buy it and listen to the lyrics of this song. We talk about how the writers of Young Justice dig deeper in these characters and think about the consequences of, okay, if we do X, how is it going to affect everyone? This is a deep, deep song about what it must be like to move so much faster than everyone else around you that how can you emotionally connect to people moving so slow? Lines like, I really think you'd like me, but you're speaking much too slow. In the blink of an eye, I'm off to go save another person. Like, I want to get to know you. Life was so much more exciting before I got this way. Now I just wait for things to happen fast enough for it to be any kind of challenge or interest. It's brilliantly written. So check out the link, go listen to the song, listen to the lyrics, and hear how somebody's dived into the psyche of someone with this kind of superpower.
And, of course, the link for that will be in the show notes and on the website, crashingthemode.com. If you make anything cool, DC or Young Justice related, if you want to share that with us, please get a hold of us on the website, email or Twitter, and let us give you some love here in our fan service. Of course, on the website, we are keeping up with our featured fan art of the week. Always make sure to check that out. We have all kinds of links over there for artists and things we have found that are just really cool about Young Justice. You know what? I think it is pretty much time to wrap up this mission. and head out of the cave. Folks, I want to thank you so much for listening here to Rich and I talk in episode 8 of this Young Justice podcast. We're going strong. This is so cool. Thanks again. Make sure you feel the Aster.
And hashtag keep binging YJ. And stay whelmed, everybody.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our computer is voiced by Madison Ray. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.